Hi all, I have another very exciting game to show you from the TCEC Season 9, Stage 2. Stockfish playing white, which is my current engine of choice. It's still a free engine, anyone can download it. Playing against Vajolet2. So this is a very interesting game. Let's have a look. D4 from Stockfish. Knight F6. C4, E6, we go into Queen's engine territory. A3. The first 8 moves, I believe, are all taken from their books anyway. C takes D5 here, because black's committing the bishop on this diagonal. White closes this diagonal in advance, or tries to. E takes D5. Bishop F4. White has a good grip on the E5 square here. Black castles. E3. C5. Trying to put pressure on the center. Bishop D3. Bishop B7. Note the bishop is locked behind its own pawn here. White castles. A6, as though there's an intention to expand on the queenside later, but also taking away B5 from white immediately. Bishop C2. It might be dangerous to have this battery later on H7, but we have knight BD7, which gives the idea that maybe the knight's going to join in defense here by going to F8 later. Rook E1. Of course, the knight is also keen not to block the D pawn as well. That could be a tactical issue sometimes. So the bishop's still supporting the pawn on D5 as well. Rook E8. So the knight is heading towards F8 defensively here. Knight E5, bishop F8. Pardon me, knight F8. Now this is a very interesting position with the knight on E5. Tartakower once said, a famous quotation, "The great master places a knight on E5. Checkmate follows by itself." Very interesting. And this is an amazing spin on this quotation, actually, this whole game, in a way. Because what happens when the knight's about to be kicked? Of course, the pawn can't kick it on the d file, but this pawn can potentially kick this knight. Do we just retreat it later? Think about that. Bishop G5. H6. Bishop H4. Some weaknesses have been encouraged on the light squares. Queen C7. Now Rook C1. So Rook's lined up against the Queen. Rook AD8. Bishop G3 pointing against the Queen. Bishop D6. And now the knight is challenged. It's actually, you might think this is an anti-positional move here, but it's actually supported. You might think it's anti-positional because isn't it weakening the light squares in the position? And what if F6 later? Isn't this just a weakness? Or what if black took on D4 first? Isn't the e-file just generally weak? We have B5, which gives the idea that maybe the E4 square is particularly sensitive. Maybe B4 later. Bishop H4 threatening to double black's pawns and play things like Queen G4 check after. This is parried with Bishop E7. But this downside of the light squares, it's parried in advance now. Bishop takes F6. So a knight's not going to be entrenched on E4. Bishop takes F6. Queen H5. Seemingly saying to black, well, you're not going to be playing G6 in a hurry now to finish Chateau Bishop, because I'm going to take on H6 here. Queen E7. What's this pressure on the E-file for? Surely G6 is not possible. Rook CD1. The bishop drops back to A8. Now Rook F1 is played with the idea that maybe the rook can come in for an attack to help the attack. If it goes to G3, Rook F3 to G3, then Queen takes H6 is threatened. Now this looks like a strange move from a club player's perspective, but it's played. C takes D4. It releases that tension in the center. What does this actually mean to release the tension in the center? Well, white doesn't have to worry too much about D4 being undermined now. It is, of course, supported already by the rook. Black might be able to attack D4 in the future, but with what? Queen A7? The bishop is locked in, still behind that pawn here. We have Rook B8. And now another piece wants to join in the attack. It's the piece which is about to be harassed perhaps with b4. This knight wants to join in, knight e2. But is it a tactical liability there? It's only held by the queen. Black tries to tactically exploit this fact that this knight is currently on its way to g3, but while it's on e2, isn't this e-file a problem? That resourcefully, it would seem, plays a strong tactical move, it would seem, in the form of g6. This runs with tempo, 2 tempos in a row perhaps, on queen takes, which is played. There's bishop g7. But white could have moved the queen back, it seems. That does seem plausible here, just to move the queen back. And if bishop g7, prepare for f6 by protecting the knight. So, but here white actually took the challenge, played queen takes h6. The knight is now not even protected by anything. It's actually a loose piece on e2, bishop g7, queen h3, and now doesn't this just win material? f6 is played. Has white just blundered a piece? Now here we have to think about Tartakower's expression again. The great master places a knight on e5, checkmate follows by itself. That's very interesting here. Although the knight's about to leave the game now, because if the knight moves, queen takes e2 is winning, it's hitting the bishop. That's just winning a piece. So white actually plays queen g3, the knight's leaving the game. But let's examine what happens now after f takes. The pawn chain here spells out liberation for several of white's pieces. In fact, virtually all of them are liberated now. There's already 2 pawns for the knight, so if white can get a 3rd pawn, then we'll be equalizing on material basically. This is an isolated pawn as well. The bishop is already liberated and coordinated with the queen, which actually compels black's next move anyway to try and defend g6. But aside from that, let's look at the pieces. This is a blocked in bishop. This is a hemmed in bishop by that pawn chain, that aggressive pawn chain. The rooks can double. They've got liberation and attacking opportunities on the f-file. They can freely double. Can black's rooks double anywhere? Not really. They're just passive. Aggressive, aggressive, passive, passive, aggressive, passive, passive. Queen, aggressive, passive. All of white's pieces seemingly are aggressive. Even this knight, aggressive, passive, because this knight can go to f4 and help target g6. The upward trend must be in white's favor here, because white is free, much freer to build up pressure on the weakest point, which is g6 in this position. White just build up not just on the f-file but on g6. And behind g6 there's a potential for pinning another piece as well and getting to black's king. Let's see. Rook b6 defending g6. And this kind of knight sack I've actually seen in a rapid game on TV between Nigel Short playing black against Adams, the young Adams, and it was a French defense, and Nigel Short played a similar knight sack with black to get an aggressive pawn chain. And it just seems that, you know, this is a potential way of getting an upward trend. Basically, there's an upward trend here that we're about to witness. Rook f3, because the rooks can freely double. b4, okay, this rook's trying to activate on the b file. That's ignored, just doubling here. b takes, rook eb8, okay, they're doubling, but is it really significant, that b file? This is more of a target area of the king around there. Now knight f4, all the pieces are working here quite hard, trying to break down g6. A defensive move, again, just trying to hold g6. But now, how does white continue? Aren't all of its pieces optimized? G6 is still the principal target here. White plays h4. This G6 can lead to a pinned piece. A pinned piece is further immobility in black's position. Rook c8. Bishop d3. A small nuisance. But look how black's pieces are just so passive. The rooks, although doubled, they haven't really got a significant entry point. The bishop stops b1, for example. h5. Already we're seeing now a pinned piece, so further pacifying that bishop basically after g takes h5, making that bishop not really control the squares. The power of the pinned piece is illusionary, is another famous quotation. Queen g5. With idea now of knight takes h5, regaining that pawn. So at the moment it's one pawn for the knight, but look how aggressive all of white's pieces are. Look how passive and pinned black's pieces are. Well, this one in particular, pinned. Black is desperate here to stop the incoming attacking flow with, for example, knight takes h5, things like rook g3, knight f6 in particular. That pawn is ready to support knight f6. This aggressive pawn chain, which is not only blunting black's pieces, also providing attacking squares like f6. So queen d8, queen f5. Black is just desperate to try and exchange off queens. Queen d7, but alas here, white can play actually e6. Because h7, the knight is overloaded here, it can't stop this e6. If it took here, it didn't, then there's queen h7 check. Or even better, maybe knight takes first to have f-file control, and then it's just mate. So an aggressive pawn on e6, but it has released the bishop for a moment. But black didn't even want to take that there on d4. That is even with check, but it's not really a great situation to try and do that. Black played queen e7 in this position. And now that bishop is pinned, rook g3. And black is actually at a breaking point here, an absolute breaking point where something's going to give. There's going to be a weakness to the last move trade-off. That black is just simply overloaded. How can black actually defend this position with things like knight takes h5 coming up? Or if the king tries to wriggle, just taking and then things like knight g6. It's all pretty scary stuff. So black actually tries to remove that pawn, rook takes e6. It leaves behind a weakness to the last move. This is now a loose rook on b8 here. And this can tactically be exploited. This is basically a giving up move. Rook takes e6. Because now we have rook takes g7 check. King takes g7. Knight takes e6 check. When the king's brought out, it's like Mr. Bean out and about. There's pieces that are about to be dropped off. After queen takes e6 here, black actually, the operator resigned. It's just hopeless. Can you see how white can try and win this rook now on b8? Okay, if it continued, queen g5 check is really strong here. If the king goes to h8, queen takes h5 check, king g7, and the queen can try and wriggle to g3 like this. So that zigzag, queen g5 check, queen h4 check, and then queen g3 check. So that picks up that rook. If we go back here and play instead queen g5 check, and if there's knight g6 instead, Can you see what white can play? I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay, bishop takes g6. And then we have queen e5 check here, picking up the rook. Yeah, this is a losing liability. This would just be winning for white. It's pretty hopeless here. So either way, black is ending up losing material now. So this game leaves an impression about what we've kind of maybe seen in master games already, in our over the board games of masters like Nigel Short. The ability to make a sacrifice like this, to understand how one side's pieces are going to be activated and liberated and the other side's pieces are going to be passive and defensive, and maybe this leads to pins and just a position which cannot be held. Basically something's going to give eventually if it reaches like optimal pressure, and something did give. This rook is just left unprotected, basically ready to be tactically exploited. So I think a marvelous demonstration which echoes Tartakower's quote about checkmate falling by itself, because it seems even after the knight left the board, white's pieces were all on attacking mode. They were all activated and ready to coordinate a winning attack. So very impressive stuff dynamically. Okay, hope you got something out of this. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.